Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week. The DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy.
The left is once again pushing a familiar narrative, and this time Bill Maher steps in with sharp, unapologetic criticism. Bernie Sanders returns to his usual message of taxing the rich, framing it as fairness and a solution to deeper economic issues. It sounds convincing in speeches and gains traction online, but when tested in reality, the cracks begin to show. Maher doesn't just disagree. He dissects the slogan and highlights what's often left unsaid. His take is direct, cutting through the noise with clarity and skepticism. If you enjoy bold political commentary without sugarcoating, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more.
An economy, to me, I know I've said this before, I still don't get it. Last week was tax day, and as usual, because HBO is so generous, and I'm sure so will be the new owners, I paid to the government, if you add in state tax, local, sales, property, fees, Obamacare, probably almost 60% of what I earn. That's a lot, and I still wouldn't mind if Bernie Sanders would stop saying the rich don't pay taxes. And while I'm sure the super rich with their army of accountants and corporate loopholes get away with murder, us regular rich people pay a shit ton of taxes. And who stands up and gives us a pat on the back? Nobody.
Maher doesn't ease into the conversation or try to win the crowd over first. He jumps straight in and puts himself at the center of the argument. By his own admission, Bill Maher says he earns around $10 million a year, and he uses that to challenge the narrative head-on. It's not abstract theory for him. It's personal math, and he lays it out bluntly. That's what gives his argument weight right from the start. He explains that when you stack federal taxes, state taxes, sales taxes, property costs, and healthcare expenses together, the total cut becomes massive. According to him, it adds up to nearly 60% of his income already gone. That's more than half of every dollar before it even fully lands in his hands. Whether people agree or not, that number forces attention because it reframes the debate in concrete terms. When Bernie Sanders continues to argue that the wealthy still aren't paying their fair share, Maher positions his own situation as a counterexample. His point isn't just emotional, it's built around the idea that there has to be a visible limit. If someone at that level is already losing a majority of their income, the question becomes unavoidable. At what point does fairness stop feeling like balance and start feeling like overreach?
10% pay 72% of all federal income taxes, and the bottom half, 3%. The Democratic Socialists talk about socialism like we don't already have a lot. Social Security, unemployment, Medicare, nutritional assistance, Medicaid, Obamacare, disability, housing subsidies. Again, not against it, just the same question. How can you be soaking the rich and failing the poor?
Argument intensifies when Bill Maher brings in big numbers that challenge the narrative head-on. He points out that the top earners already contribute the majority of federal income taxes, often cited around 70% or more. At the same time, data from the Federal Reserve shows the bottom half still holds only a tiny share of total wealth. Figures from the U.S. Census Bureau also show millions of Americans remain below the poverty line. That gap between heavy taxation and limited results raises a difficult and uncomfortable question. If so much money is already being redistributed, why hasn't it meaningfully changed the reality for those still struggling?
Last week, they were redoing the story they did 18 years ago about remote area medical. That is the program modeled after medical teams that drop into the poorest countries in the world for a few days to set up a tent where people with no access to health care can get some. And now we're one of those countries. Doctors within borders.
The strain doesn't stop at poverty. It cuts straight through the middle class that once held everything steady. Rising costs, Stagnant wages and constant financial pressure are squeezing families harder than ever before. The United States no longer looks like the nation confidently supporting others, but one facing growing cracks from within. Even groups like Feeding America are seeing increased demand, showing how many working families are struggling to keep up. Donations are slowing, charities are feeling the pressure, and the safety nets are stretching thin. When the richest country in the world starts to look this fragile from the inside, it signals a deeper problem that goes far beyond taxes alone.
That the federal government alone took in over $5 trillion in taxes last year, and we still need that. Are we really this incompetent and corrupt? Don't answer that. Whatever it is, somehow the ultra-rich keep getting ultra-richer, while a growing percentage is feeling truly desperate. You just wouldn't know it because everyone on TV is rich. Reality TV, rich women day drinking. Drama, rich women whose friend got murdered. Comedy, rich men shouting into cell phones.
If you followed Bill Maher even casually, this argument isn't new because he's been repeating it for years with the same blunt framing. He argues the core issue isn't taxation but spending, pointing out that the federal government already collects trillions annually, and yet many problems remain unchanged. Poverty, homelessness, and pressure on the middle class continue to persist, raising questions about where that money is actually going. To drive the point home, he often points to California as a real-world example that challenges the narrative. Despite high taxes and progressive policies, the state still struggles with visible inequality and large homeless populations, which critics say undermines the idea that higher taxes alone solve systemic issues. That contrast is what gives his argument force, because it shifts the focus from how much is collected to how effectively it is used. In his view, if more taxation automatically created better outcomes, places like California would reflect that success. Yet the reality on the ground tells a more complicated story.
Like a nice guy, and I congratulate him on an extraordinary political achievement. But before the whole left side of the country catches socialism fever, let's listen to the other big winner in last Tuesday's election, Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who, before the 24 election, said things like, "If the party didn't shift to the center, we will get torn apart. And we need to never use the word socialist or socialism ever again." Well, she was right, but they didn't listen. Typical, am I right, ladies? One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying,
I am a democratic socialist.
This is where Bill Maher shifts from comedy into sharp political critique, framing his argument as a warning rather than just opinion. He claims movements tied to democratic socialism are reshaping messaging in ways that connect more with activists than everyday voters. According to him, workers, families, and small business owners aren't looking for ideological lectures. They want safety, stability, and a system that works. That disconnect, he argues, is pushing the Democratic Party further away from the people it needs to win elections. His prescription is simple but blunt. Move back toward the center, and start speaking in a way that resonates with real life. In his view, the middle wasn't lost by accident. It was abandoned, and now it's quietly moving in the opposite direction.
socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know.
Underneath it all is the part that makes Bill Maher's argument hit hardest, the gap between a powerful promise and messy reality. Socialism is often presented as fairness, equality, and shared prosperity, which gives it strong emotional appeal. But history shows very different outcomes in places like Soviet Union, Cuba, and Venezuela, where results have been mixed or deeply contested. Critics point to economic struggles, shortages, and limits on freedom, while supporters highlight social programs and external pressures. That tension is what keeps the debate alive, because the idea often feels stronger than its real-world track record. In Maher's framing, the danger is when the promise becomes so appealing that people stop questioning how well it actually works.
People sometimes, I think, question some of what you're saying. This is a survey, student loan forgiveness recipients. 73% of applicants say they are likely to spend their extra money on non-essential, including vacations, smartphone, drugs, and alcohol. They admitted that to the pollster.
Who is this pollster?
NBC News. 52% they are very likely to buy new clothing. 46% they would use the money for vacation.
Another reason Maher says this message struggles in America is cultural, arguing many people lean toward capitalism by instinct rather than ideology. He suggests that even when policies like student debt forgiveness provide relief, the reactions often reflect individual ambition more than collective thinking. In examples he highlights, recipients talk about investing, traveling, buying homes, or upgrading their lifestyle once financial pressure eases. That response, he argues, doesn't signal a shift towards socialism but reinforces a desire to build and get ahead personally. His broader point is that many Americans prioritize ownership, progress, and upward mobility over long-term dependency. If political messaging ignores that mindset, he warns, it risks disconnecting from how people actually think about success and opportunity.
That stuff that happened before their appearance on the planet didn't really happen, but it did. We've run this experiment many times, and the results are always obvious. Here's capitalist South Korea at night from space. Here's socialist North Korea. Yeah. In 1990, Venezuela was wealthier than Poland. But then Poland, finally free of Soviet-style economics, went all in on capitalism. And now their economy is as big as Japan. And people there have high wages, low inflation, cars, vacations.
This is where Maher pulls the argument out of theory and into history, pointing to examples like Venezuela, Cuba, and the Soviet Union. He contrasts that with the stark divide between South Korea and North Korea, often used as a visual symbol of two different systems. His argument is that these outcomes aren't isolated cases, but part of a pattern that keeps repeating across time and geography. He rejects the idea that one country could simply avoid those results through better technology or ambition. Critics would argue each case has unique historical and political factors that shape its outcome. Still, his core point is that repeated results raise questions about whether the system itself carries deeper flaws.
A lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want. All that is socialism, much of it appropriate to soften the edges of capitalism, but the DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing.
So there it is. Maher once again delivers a sharp and unapologetic critique that cuts straight through the political noise. He challenges the approach promoted by Bernie Sanders and supporters of democratic socialism, arguing that higher taxes alone are not a complete solution. His focus is on how trillions are already collected, yet many core problems still remain unresolved. Issues like poverty, middle-class pressure, and homelessness continue to persist despite massive spending. He also points to the historical track record tied to socialism as a warning worth examining. In his view, unless the Democratic Party reconnects with everyday voters, future elections could bring serious consequences.